thank you, Donna, for being here on this stage.
Great. I love the book on Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Oh, thank you so much.
I've known her a little bit for a long time, and I thought the book was terrific.
Oh,
you all have to buy it.
I did not pay her for that. Well, we're really here tonight in an intergenerational spirit, and that's the spirit in which we wrote the book. Mm-hmm. So neither you nor I are girls. Tonight is called Girls Unleashed. So talk to me about when you were a girl and what your dreams were for the world and for yourself.
Well, I had a wonderful childhood. I come from a large, extended Lebanese family in which everybody lived within. My father had 7 brothers and sisters. My mother had 8, and everybody lived within the same 4-block area. So no one ever, in Cleveland, Ohio, so no one ever locked their door. And we actually had schedules of which family we went to lunch because our schools were within walking distance. But I also had a very unusual mother. My mother was a nationally ranked tennis player.
Wow.
And she went to law school later in her life, so she was a great role model. And most of my childhood was spent in sports. And I played competitive tennis, but I also played softball. My real love was softball. And I'll tell you a story. One day I was playing with my friends. I was 9 years old, and the park actually, which was part of the high school, was across the street. And there was a park director, and he came over and watched us 9-year-olds playing softball. And he said, "You know, you girls are pretty good." He said, "But you have to learn how to throw overhead and how to slide." This may be my first feminist experience. And he said, "If you do that, there's a new league in town called the Pigtail League, and I think you girls are really good enough to win the city championship." And he was really a cute college student. And so we were all in love with him. So we practiced, and we won the city championship that year, that first year, because he was a great coach. His name was George Steinbrenner.
Whoa! Wow.
So before he passed on, if you walked up to George Steinbrenner, who of course owned the New York Yankees, and asked him about Donna Shalala, he would have said, "She's the best shortstop I ever had and the cheapest."
Wow.
So my childhood was made up of sports with a mother that was very supportive,
mm-hmm.
And a father that was extraordinarily supportive. In fact, I found a letter he had written to the Cleveland Plain Dealer in 1937, before he was married, supporting women's education. And
Wow.
I still run into women in Cleveland who say that your father talked my father into letting me go to college because he was so committed.
What an incredible legacy. Wow.
Yep.
And so it sounds like
My mother passed on, by the way, at 103, and she played tennis until she was 102. Now, she held on to her walker and hit the balls, but
it sounds like you have a lot to live up to, and you really have already. So here we are in 2016. You had, it sounds like, a really stereotype-busting girlhood. But unfortunately, if you look in this country, if you look around the world, we still have barriers that girls face. So what can we do as women who are, creating the world that they'll inherit? What can we do to make the world better for the girls that are growing up now?
Well, fundamentally, we actually know from an economic point of view that if you invest in girls, that you change the economy of nations. So, there's a good economic reason to invest in girls' education and girls' health and to give women opportunities. And so making that case around the world, we've actually we have a big program at the Clinton Foundation that actually measures these metrics. It's called No Ceilings. And most girls in the world now can get an elementary education. Girls' health has improved all over the world. It's improved dramatically in the United States. Teenage pregnancies are way down in this country by at least, I think, by 57%.
Wow.
Now, some of that's related to our enormous campaigns on teenage pregnancy, and some of it, I think, related to AIDS. I think teenagers are still having sex. I think they're having more protective sex. And I say that as a college president that's used to dealing with these kinds of issues.
And access to better contraception, right? I think
Access to better
evidence.
contraception, but also changing the culture in terms of what's acceptable.
Yeah, you do see teens delaying sex as well.
Exactly, but I want to make it very clear. I'm not so sure American kids are delaying sex. I think they are delaying pregnancy.
Right, right. Well, I mean, it seems like it's all about making sure that even young women have access to make the choices for themselves, right? We're talking about autonomy, not to feel pressured into not using a condom, to have access to the pill and so on.
But the places where we're failing in the areas of reproductive health and maternity, and babies and women dying in birth. We still have a lot of work to do in this country in those areas, and we're totally failing in terms of exercise. The fact that most schools have eliminated physical education, girls drop out of sports at least half the time compared to men, compared to boys, and so just getting girls into exercise programs, into sports becomes very important. In 1998, my secretary came in and said, hey, we just got this call from a couple of members of the U.S. national women's soccer team, and they'd like to come see you. Well, I'm the kind of person that when I run a place that I'll see almost anyone. So in walk Mia Hamm, Julie Foudy, and Carla Overbeck. And here's what they said to me. They said, we're about to have the Women's World Cup in 1999. And we're going around the country in 1998. And one of the things, playing friendlies to try to build up support, because we're going to have big audiences to be able to host the World Cup. But we've been going into schools and we don't have anything to say. Is there any chance that you could design a health campaign, girls' health campaign, around us so that we'd have something to say as we went into schools around the country? And I said, sure. I wasn't sure what agency would do it. So I picked up the phone and called the head of the Centers for Disease Control, because they do a lot of health promotion. And I said, hey, can you design a campaign? And luckily, the head of the Centers for Disease Control had a daughter who played soccer. But he said, sure. We designed a girl power campaign. And we designed a campaign with posters that said, smoke your opponent, not cigarettes. So it was a big anti-cigarette campaign.
Kill two birds with one stone.
Yeah, and there are still posters of Mia and Julie and Carla Overbeck and the other great players of 1999. So taking advantage of, everybody's taking advantage of men's sports heroes, but taking advantage of women's sports heroes, we hit huge percentages of the schools in this country and of young women, and tied it to an extraordinary sports event in this country. And the Girl Power campaign had all sorts of stuff, and autograph books, and there are still women today who still have that stuff that we gave out, but they gave out stuff. We shipped it all over the country so they could give out posters and things as they went on. But unfortunately, Title IX has helped us a lot, but the dropping of physical education programs in the schools has affected women more than men, affected young women more than men.
And why is that?
Particularly girls. I think it's in part cultural, not getting sweaty, and in part organized women's activities sports activities aren't as large in this country outside of schools.
Right.
And in part, the silly idea we had that you could eliminate recess and eliminate sports programs and exercise programs, and
I want to go on the record and say
create healthy programs.
I'm very pro recess.
Yeah.
Of course, I always spend gym class walking the track, but
Right.
everybody needs a break. That's just healthy.
Right. It was my favorite part of school, actually. I have to admit.
I mean, it seems like so much of these kinds of drop-offs that you mentioned of girls in sports, what it is girls being socialized that they have to be dainty, that they can't be strong, that their bodies can't look too muscular. I mean, it's sexism. That's what it is.
Well,
it's
it is,
internalized
and
sexism.
it's also, we're actually doing a better job now getting girls into science than we are, and exercise is so important. In the Clinton Foundation, we have these healthy schools, 37,000 around the country, in which we've eliminated all the sugary drinks, in which we have exercise, the schools have exercise programs and healthy foods at lunch and at breakfast, because it's also related to obesity, which is a huge issue and starts very young in this country.
I want to go back. You mentioned reproductive rights. You talked about it as a place in which women's progress has been halted. And, I spend a lot...
messed up. Let's say messed up. Yeah.
Well, we were encouraged to be provocative, so let me ask you this. it's been more than 50 years since the Supreme Court said that married couples had a right to contraception. It's been more than 40 years since the Supreme Court recognized that women have a right to end their pregnancies. So why are we still arguing about this? What the fuck?
Because it's become an ideological issue, and it's also a religious issue for some religious organizations, and I'm Catholic, so I'm very sensitive on this particular subject. We've made enormous progress in this area. We've funded huge numbers of women having access to reproductive health through federal government programs, and we fought for those programs.
Title 10.
And I remember when RU 486 was the French company wanted to give it to the United States government, and I thought, oh my God, that's all I need. I'll have a conversation with Congress about this. So we had a conversation with the Population Council, who took the license. And frankly, you can thank Warren Buffett, because the Buffett family financed and underwrote women's access, and has consistently underwrote women's access to reproductive health. And they took the RU 486.
Right.
But it just shows you how the head of that pharmaceutical company happened to be very Catholic. How did I find that out? Because I called the only person I knew that knew French corporations. I called Felix Rohatyn, the great leader of one of the great investment banking firms, Lazard, and I said, Felix, I need advice on this. And he said, oh my God, he said, he's very Catholic. He sees the cardinal every week, so you've got to figure out a way to get that license to the United States, but I understand you don't want to have it to government. So you never know how the politics works here, or who you call, or how you put these things together. All women don't have access to reproductive health. We fought, I think, successfully through the Accountable Care Act, giving women access to full reproductive health services. There are millions now of 55 million women in this country through government programs have access, and we also have private access through Planned Parenthood, which I'm a huge fan of and have been a longtime supporter of.
Right. Well, I mean,
and I have to say, I came from a very Republican family.
Yeah.
Let me assure you, and they've been longtime supporters of Planned Parenthood.
Right. Well, I do think that there's been a change here. I mean, first of all, I mean, you pointed to the Buffett family, which has been a huge benefactor also in developing more effective contraception. They were behind some of these incredible studies that showed that if you gave women the choice of what kind of contraception they wanted long-acting reversible contraception like the IUD,
right.
And then you would cut abortion rates entirely. So we know how to do it, right? But it does seem like, you mentioned the Affordable Care Act, it does seem like, so people develop the technology, RU 486, better contraception like the IUD, and people bring it to market, and that's the first step, but it gets tangled up in politics. And I have absolute respect for individual conscience, but it does seem like only women's health gets ensnared in this kind of political kind of volleyball, to use the sports analogy. So what do we do to kind of take it out of the realm of politics, or can it be taken?
We have to, one of the things that President Clinton taught me is that you have to start by reducing the numbers of unwanted pregnancies. You can't start with a discussion about access to abortion. You have to start by convincing people that there are ways to prevent unwanted pregnancy, and whether it's the use of condoms or other kinds of reproductive health procedures. But whatever it is, you have to start, and that's why the teenage pregnancy rates coming down are so significant for this country. Our attitude has to be that we want to do everything we can to reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies. That reframing the discussion that way is important, not just in the politics, but in the culture of the country in terms of what's acceptable and what is our personal responsibility in these areas.
And
we're going to have this fight for a long time. There's just no question in my mind. But if you can, on one hand, reduce the number of unwanted pregnancy, and on the other hand, make sure that women have access for a wide variety of reasons, I think you just have to approach it in that way.
Right. Well, it does seem like we know how to do it. We know how to reduce unintended pregnancy.
Well, if you can get in the heads of every teenager in America.
But we've done it. We've done it.
Yeah,
I mean,
we
it's
have
been
done
successful.
it. But we have to keep working at it.
Right.
We have to keep working at it because being a teenager in America is just a challenge.
Well, let me ask you.
And I say it as someone who spent my career talking to teenagers.
Right.
It's easier to work with the United States Congress than it is with American teenagers.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should give teenagers some credit. I mean,
Yeah.
they're doing,
No, I love
they're
them,
doing
but-
pretty well. I think we can learn from them. But, you know, it's tough. It's
Look,
tough to have
I
a
went to
changing body.
college in which if someone had an unwanted pregnancy, I mean, I went with a friend to Texas in which we crossed the border to a safe provider to get
Wow. What year was that?
1971.
Wow, so 2 years before Roe,
Yeah.
and you went to Texas.
We went to Texas because there was apparently a safe provider in Mexico.
As we wait for the Supreme Court to rule on
Yeah.
Texas's abortion restrictions.
Yeah, there was a safe provider over in Mexico. I mean, people knew about these kinds of things, but only if you had money.
Yeah.
If you were low income, this wasn't available. And part of our fight has to be that no matter what your income is, you ought to have the same access to family planning and services that everybody else has. But we've got to start. I can't emphasize enough that we've got to start with reducing unwanted pregnancy.
So speaking of reproductive health, I want to take it globally. We're going to wrap it up, but we can't talk about women's autonomy, women's health, preventing pregnancies that are unwanted or poorly timed without talking about Zika. So including in the United States, there's been a couple hundred cases here of pregnant women with Zika. Around the world, we're talking about countries where contraception is very restricted. Abortion is often illegal. What can people who are concerned about women having the choice over whether to become pregnant, particularly when you have the specter of Zika hanging over you, what can we do?
It's interesting that Zika is actually raising the question in those countries about abortion. There actually are debates going on in countries that have been affected by Zika on precisely this issue. So there is, I wouldn't describe it as healthy, but there is a discussion going on in many of these places. But this is, as far as I can remember, this is the first disease that we've had that directly affects pregnant women and their partners.
Right.
Because that's
And of
the
course,
way
they're developing fetuses.
it's transmitted. But Zika, we don't have a cure for, but we do have a way to prevent it. And it's not just not getting pregnant. We have a way of controlling the mosquitoes.
Right.
And luckily, we're about to go into winter in Brazil and in some other countries so that we may be able to finally get some control there.
Okay, I know I said that was the last question, but this is the real last question. We're thinking about
I've
the
heard that
world.
before.
I'm a reporter. The world that we want girls to inherit, the world that we want to build alongside girls. So, what would it mean for girls and for women of all ages if we had the first female president in this country?
Wow. You know, I was at a high school the other day, and I said to the young women in the audience, what do you want? What can we do for you? And they said, make me strong inside. The one girl stood up and said, make me strong inside. I think that the first woman president starts to do that. Makes it very clear that there are no limits, there are no glass ceilings. There is nothing in the way of absolute opportunity. But we want that for every little girl, no matter where she lives on earth.
Amen. Thank you, Donna.
You're welcome.
That was such a treat. And now I have another treat. I'm going to welcome to the stage a woman who knows a little bit about what Donna was just talking about, make me strong inside. She's going to talk about bravery. She's going to talk about busting stereotypes. How do we get beyond the myths that girls have to be perfect? Please welcome to the stage education activist and Girls Who Code founder, Reshma Saujani.
So in 2010, I did something really brave, or some would say really stupid. I ran for United States Congress in a Democratic primary against an 18-year incumbent because I thought that that was a great idea. I had pretty much no chance of winning, but like a 1,000-page policy book. And I remember my friends and I, the only thing we knew how to do was build a website, and so we built one. And we raised $50,000 from Indian aunties that were just so happy an Indian girl was running. But I swore I was going to win. And I remember on election day, I sat there in my victory party that never happened, clutching my father's hand as we watched the election returns come on. And that little ticker was not going past 19%. I lost. I was broke. I was humiliated. I had pissed off everybody in the Democratic establishment. I had no contingency plan. And as I went to bed that night, I kept thinking about the same faces, and actually the faces that I had never seen. Because you see, when you run for office, you visit a lot of schools, and as I would visit schools, I'd go into their computer science labs and the robotics classes, and I'd see dozens of boys clamoring to be the next Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg. And I thought to myself, where are the girls? And this question of where are the girls started as a question and it literally became my obsession because it didn't make sense to me, right? At a time where women were the majority in college, the majority in our labor force, where were we in tech, the industry that was literally shaping our future? And when I dug in, I realized that, well, we were once there 32 years ago. In the 1980s, 37% of computer science graduates were women. Today, that number is less than 18%. If we were all to Google right now a picture of Steve Jobs' original Macintosh team, there were more women on it then than any technology team today. This is probably a good time for an important disclosure. I am not a coder. I did not major in computer science, so I don't come to this problem because of my professional experience. I'm also not doing this or working on this issue because I'm a woman, even though I'm a feminist with a capital F. My passion for getting more women in technology comes because it matters to me who has access to the jobs of today and tomorrow. Because you see, when I was that congressional candidate and I would go into schools in the Upper East Side, the wealthy district, those girls had computer science classes and robotics labs. But in other schools and Queensbridge housing projects, there were 500 kids using one computer in the basement of a church. And I wanted to make sure that all girls, even girls like me, the daughter of refugees, had a chance at getting those jobs. Because there are 1.4 million jobs that are open right now in computing and tech, and less than 3% of them are going to be filled by women. And you can make twice of any private sector job in one of those jobs. The problem is that to get one of those jobs, it's helpful if you have a computer science degree. And to get a computer science degree, it's helpful if you took computer science in high school. Problem is only 1 out of 10 American schools offers computer science, and only 4,000 girls took the AP Computer Science exam last year. And in 3 states, no girls took the AP Computer Science exam. I know there are girls in Mississippi. So, people always ask me, why? How did this happen? And so as I started Girls Who Code in 2012, we taught 20 girls to computer program. By the end of this year, we're going to teach 40,000 girls in all 50 states. Thank you. And so people always ask me why, how, what, how did this happen? So the one big thing is culture. From the 1980s till today, we've created a myth of a programmer as a dude in a hoodie, and he's sitting in a basement somewhere, and he hasn't showered, and he's drinking a Red Bull, right? And he's staring at his screen. And little girls look at him and say, I can't relate. You cannot be what you cannot see. In addition to that, from a culture perspective, right? We've created a world where we've allowed our girls to say they hate math. I can't tell you how many audiences I've spoke to where I've asked a group of girls and I said, how many of you have ever said, I hate math? How many of you have daughters or girls who've ever said, I hate math? Come on, raise them. Every single one of you, right? I know. If you had asked them, how many of you have said, I hate to read, I hate to write? No hands will be raised. How have we raised girls in a culture where it's okay to say that they hate something and a skill set that they need to survive in the 21st century? We should be ashamed. The second thing that I think has caused the lack of girls in technology is because we've raised our girls to be perfect and we've raised our boys to be brave. Our girls have been taught to smile pretty, play it safe, get all A's, don't get your dress dirty. And boys have been taught to swing high, crawl to the top of the monkey bars, and just jump off head first. And by the time we're adults, women, we are gravitating towards the careers that we know that we're going to be good at. Whereas boys, men, they're taking risk after risk after risk. In fact, in Silicon Valley, you can't even get funded unless you've had 2 failed startups, right? In other words, we're raising our girls to be perfect, and we're raising our boys to be brave. Every Girls Who Code teacher tells me the exact same story. She'll say, during the first week when girls are first learning how to code, a teacher will have a student call her over and she'll say, I don't know what code to write. And the teacher will look at her screen and she'll see a blank text editor. So if she didn't know any better, she'll think that her student spent the past 20 minutes just staring at the screen. But if the teacher presses undo a few times, she'll see that her student wrote code and then deleted it. She tried, she came close, but she didn't get it exactly right. Instead of showing the progress that she made, she rather showed nothing at all. Perfection or bust. It turns out that our girls are really great at coding. And when you combine teaching them to code with a supportive sisterhood that is cheering them on, they will build incredible things. And I see this every day. Take, for instance, Cora. Cora was 5 years old when her daddy got diagnosed with cancer. And she decided at that moment she was going to be a doctor because she wanted to save her father's life. And she didn't know the connection between computer science and technology and medicine until Girls Who Code, where she built an algorithm to help detect whether a cancer is benign or malignant. She is 16 years old. Or Jasmine, who comes from a family where her mother works at Burger King, single mom, 4 brothers and sisters. She lives in Oakland. And every day she takes 2 trains and 2 buses to go learn how to code at her program at Facebook. And when she was given the opportunity to create something, she decided that she was going to build an app to help teach young Latina girls SAT words, because girls in her community, they didn't have fancy tutors and fancy SAT classes. So she needed a technical solution to make sure that her girls had an opportunity to get access to education. She had the courage, the bravery to not build something for herself, but to build something for others. 2 of our girls, Sophie and Andy, love video games. And they decided, you know what? We're going to build a game called Tampon Run. Yes, Tampon Run. Because every girl gets their period. And many girls across the world, when they get their period, they drop out of school. And it didn't make sense to them, right? And so they were going to build a game to help educate people across the country and across the world about the menstruation taboo. Here's the thing. No boy was sitting there thinking, the menstruation taboo. I got to build a game, We got to figure this out. I got to educate the world. Was never going to happen. It's so important to give girls access to coding and technical skills, because I promise you they're going to solve the problems of today and tomorrow. Just a few weeks ago, I was sitting there at one of our club's graduations, and 2 girls got up, Lucy and Maya, and they basically demonstrated an app, a technical solution that they had built to find a solution to lead poisoning, because of what they had seen in Flint, Michigan. 2 girls in 7th grade are looking at the world and saying, what can I do to make it better? We have an opportunity to change the world, and yes, to solve the problems of today and tomorrow. And we do it by teaching our girls how to computer program. And we also do it by making sure that they get comfortable with imperfection. Because when we create a world where our girls learn how to be imperfect, and yes, that means making sure that our girls continue to do the things that they suck at. And that is the responsibility of every single parent in this room. When girls are 5, 6, 7, and 8, they don't know what they're good or bad at. So when they say that we don't take them out of soccer or take them out of playing chess, we keep pushing them and making them get comfortable with risks. Because I promise you, when we do that, they are simply going to build a world, a better world for themselves and each and every single one of us. Thank you.
So I want, excuse me, I want to say that I just borrowed Peggy's pencil and I wrote down tampon run because I'm going to go home and download that. That was incredibly inspiring. Thank you so much, Reshma. My name is Irin Carmon and I have said that I'm bad at math. So I hate math, but I'm going to correct my ways because I'm so inspired by your words. Thank you, Reshma. So we've been talking about women's health. We've been talking about girls' economic empowerment, girls reaching into their strength. We have a real treat tonight, the world premiere of an artistic expression of the kinds of themes that we've been talking about tonight. So what ties together Make Me Strong Inside, what Donna was talking about she heard from girls that she visited with, and making girls brave? Well, we're talking about invisible barriers. We're talking about even when there aren't legal strictures that put girls in a particular box, there are still these barriers that prevent women and girls from reaching their full potential. So we're really thrilled. Girl Effect has brought us, from their work with girls for over a decade, the Nigerian-American spoken word poet Bassi Ikpi has put together incredibly beautiful words with animation. So we're going to have some artistic expression in our passionate girls presentation tonight. So please enjoy Invisible Barriers.
Do you know that you can fly? That you can change the world? We have constructed the structures, raised the roof on buildings to house and heal and educate, laid shiny new roads leading to newly erected schools, classrooms ready and waiting. So much has been done, yet so many blank spaces remain. Where are the girls' names? Why are they merely placeholders, dismissed to be kept as young mothers or child brides? Wives so young, their eyes are filled with oceans they may never see. What of she? Trapped inches from her own liberation, dutiful to her family, invisible in her community, voice smothered and othered, raised to be thought of as second or not as valuable as her brothers. It's not enough for us to build the rooms. If girls can't gain access, then society will lose. We must know that she is the stairway to growth, and the truth is, we must encourage communities to hear the language girls speak. Give them voice, visibility. Let them believe that they are the key. Show the distance they can travel, what they can achieve when they step out of the shadows and into the light. Their value amplified, their true worth recognized. Then they themselves and their community will rise with determination, and girls will see that being born in this world is not pain, but potential. Not an obstacle, but an opportunity. Economies will thrive on their survival and dignity and self-respect. Do you know that you are a girl? That this is your effect? Do you know that you can change the world? Do you know that you can fly?
That was a gorgeous film, wasn't it? Amazing. Amazing. I am so delighted to welcome to the stage a wonderful woman. Farah Golant is the very new head of the CEO of Gorilla Effect, which is the organization that put this film together. Farah comes to Gorilla Effect from a long and storied career working in the creative industries, and she was involved in a number of issues, including creating Starbucks' neighborhood campaign, including figuring out a way to make Pepsi appear to be about values, including the GE Imaginations campaign, and now she's taken on working with girls. But before we get into talking with you, Farah, and thank you so much for traveling from London to be here, that film is just beautiful, just stunning. Tell us a little bit about the background and how did you come to be working with the Nigerian spoken word poet? Tell us a bit about it.
So the desire of this film was to really start to challenge perceptions about girls in developing communities, so not in the developed world, not in America, but really in sub-Saharan Africa and the places where Girl Effect works, and to challenge the notion that girls are just another component of the global poverty problem, and that actually if you could reframe the value of girls, make them visible, make them vocal, give them support and self-belief, that they actually can be participants in solutions, and that the value of girls is when girls rise, they bring communities with them. I mean, there is a very well-known fact that as girls rise and as you invest in girls, GDP growth comes. So this was a wonderful collaboration with Bassi, an amazing woman who has really visceral experience of her own as a Nigerian-born poet. And she wrote this as a piece of performance poetry, which we animated. And it was really to present the vision of a new normal. And it's not an easy thing because, of course, we're working in communities that have very entrenched negative norms around girls, very entrenched beliefs about what girls should and shouldn't do, very closed communities where just access to education, to health, to financial inclusion. So it's really quite a big challenge to say, how do you represent the value of a girl?
So that's interesting you're talking about representing. Does anyone in this room remember the really, really cool animation called The Girl Effect? That was like a little, you do, Marie, it was a little ticker taker, it was a young girl. Does anyone remember it? It sort of went wildly viral. No one was really thinking about investing in girls' education, and it was this hugely successful, very simple way about talking about investing in girls. And really, I think it was maybe about a decade ago when Bill Clinton was asked, what's the single most important investment one could make? And he said, investing in girls' education. So in some ways, investing in girls has become mainstream. And you know, as Donna said, we've built the schools, we've done all these things, but this film talks about something different. It talks about the next chapter, and it talks about maybe the harder work of these invisible barriers. And, you know, we work with a number of people that say it's not really about just getting them in school, it's about the quality of the education and getting them into middle school and high school and university. And so tell me about taking on this next chapter. And you and I had a fascinating conversation about unlocking invisible barriers. So talk to us about that.
So I think the next, you know, there's so much work has been done, and I think the next chapter is about action rather than advocacy and intention. So if I give you a statistic about, you know, we think so much progress has been made, and of course it has, but in Ethiopia, a place where we work, 20% of girls are married before the age of 15. So when a girl is married before the age of 15, she drops out of school, she bears children at a time when her body is not ready for it, she doesn't have adequate opportunity to take care of herself, there's no hope of economic opportunity. So I think it's worth remembering that the progress the world is making, there are economies where this progress has not yet happened. So the next chapter is really to talk less holistically about education and health, financial inclusion, but really to get into the countries and to work now with communities, as we do at Girl Effect, to really open up a new discourse inside communities. And if I may, I guess what I would say is we work with media, we work with safe spaces, we work with transformative technologies to really get inside very close communities, to access girls living in poverty, access their families, their communities, and their leaders to start to paint a new narrative. And we do that through media. So we have magazines, we have dramas, we have radio shows, We have safe spaces. We work with transformative technology so that even in very, very underdeveloped communities, access to mobile phones can be really transformative because you can play content, you can connect girls to other girls, you can connect girls to services. So I would say that a lot of work still has to be done in Ethiopia, in Rwanda, in Nigeria. A lot has been made of the missing girls in Nigeria, but there are whole communities where access to assets is completely closed to girls.
But let me challenge you on that. So you're a very interesting choice for this organization at this moment in time, because one would think, it would be hard to make people think that drinking Pepsi or that Pepsi Cola was a company that really cared about values, or that really spending $4 at Starbucks, was the neighborhoody thing to do or something. And so you've taken on massive challenges in terms of using advertising, using communications, but this is really a different thing. What you mentioned, the Boko Haram girls, 200 girls, as you know, were abducted from northern Nigeria. When they all came back, every single one of them was pregnant. And they were pregnant because they were raped. So that's just one small example. But I think also, watching the Hillary Clinton election, this issue of to what extent do people have unconscious bias about girls? And this next chapter, so why are you the right person to be taking on this right now? And how, it's fine to say we're going to use media, but how do you really change social norms and beliefs?
There's probably about 5 questions in there, so I'll try and answer as best I can. That's a classic Peggy, complex question. So I guess what the commercial world knows, I've had 27 years in the creative industries and have crossed into development because I know without a shadow of a doubt that ideas move people to feel and think differently. So of course you can build the schools and the hospitals, of course you can have access to assets, but if you don't move people to feel, think, and do things differently, the assets are sub-optimized. So what the commercial world, the private sector knows very well is what behavior change work looks like. And this is in a way the same, but it's behavior change against social impact rather than financial impact. And it's actually getting into communities and using techniques that the private sector knows very well to create a new kind of discussion, to move people to feel and think differently, to open up a new kind of narrative that says, for instance, in Rwanda, we have a magazine which is entirely constructed by girls. So there are girl journalists, girl creators, girl distributors, there's a value chain, girls create an economy. They distribute into communities and then girls read the magazine together. And it's partly entertainment, but it's partly skill, it's education, it through fiction can touch some really tough subjects like early forced child marriage, female cutting, and actually if you create a medium that people can get around, that they can read, they can touch, they can discuss, they can use mobile applications to interact with an agony aunt, that what you're doing is you're creating connectivity with people and actually getting them to ask the questions. And as people ask questions, of course, what happens is people start to feel and think differently. It's a little bit like anything in life. You just need to open another perspective.
So you sound very positive. Let me say you sound a little idealistic about this, because I really do think that unconscious beliefs and biases and sexism
I'm not
is
easily trained.
so deeply entrenched. So, and I'm really taken by Reshma's conversation about fear of failure. What are you afraid of in this new job? And do you think you really can tap into some of these really entrenched?
Well, of course, I have a sort of, I feel very optimistic. I'm 9 months into the development sector after 27 years. So I have euphoria and sort of daily bouts of mild terror, I think it would be fair to say. Can we make this change? Can we measure the change? Can we change negative social norms? I think the thing that I know and can see is that also technology is changing our world, and that actually I can see. So we have a global platform that serves up content. We started 18 months ago. 18 months later, 10 million people are connecting to this platform. 10 million people are uploading stories. 10 million people are sharing stories of, I am 15, I am pregnant, I don't understand menstruation. Can you can you get HIV by kissing a boy? So there is a platform where 10 million people are interacting with content, and there is mathematical probability, which I do know, I can be optimistic about, is that it's on track, it's on in 44 countries, in 24 languages, it's on track to get to 100 million people by November of 2018. So I guess part of my optimism is the speed at which technology can actually penetrate communities. We know that a 10% increase in mobile penetration in any developing income country is actually going to put 1.2 to the GDP. So I guess my optimism comes from, and maybe delusion, and maybe I'm being naive and I'm set to fail, which I'm really okay with, but my optimism comes from I can see how creative ideas, creative work and technology can be transformative. And of course it will take a long time, and of course it's prone to failure, but I think you have to be wildly determined and quite optimistic trying.
That's wonderful. So give us an example of something that you did in your previous work in the private sector where you were trying to change minds, and that maybe has given you some inspiration or that you're drawing on in this work you're doing with changing social norms around girls.
Yeah, so I did in my previous life a lot of government work, social campaigning. So we did a big anti-smoking campaign that we had in Britain. Shudder to think what's going to happen when I go home tomorrow, but anyway, that's just another story altogether, don't get me started. But we worked with anti-smoking with teenage audiences, and of course what you find is that teenage girls tell other teenage girls things that they wouldn't tell an adult. So you uncover insights about teenage girls. Actually, the thing that made them want to stop smoking was nothing to do with health or nothing to do with anything. It was just when you said to them, it's going to ruin your skin and make you smell. That was more powerful than longitudinal, long-term horror stories. So I think if you can get inside people's hearts and minds and you can unlock the things they really care about, you do have the potential for profound change. And I worry all the time about failure, but I think, when you live in the commercial world, you know what failure looks like and you get over it.
That's excellent. So let's talk a little bit about you, your own life. You're such an interesting person. I'm so delighted to know you, and I'm so delighted you're in this position. You were born in Nairobi to an Iranian and Indian parents, and you sort of consider yourself a citizen of the world, which is so interesting. And then also, this morning, the ruling
Brexit,
came out of Brexit right now, and interestingly, you just came onto campus and you said, I am just so stressed about this. I have to go and get completely sloshed tonight to get over this. But since we have you on the stage here, and you said something about the freedom of ideas in the United States, and you were so. Can you share with us a little bit about your personal feelings at this moment?
Thank you for sharing my personal confession to you from this afternoon. But if I were to say,
I already have the wine. It's right after.
I guess, I feel that the world really needs the free flow of ideas and talent and people to collaborate. Ideas and change are borderless, and are borderless in spirit and in practice. So, of course, I'm profoundly committed. I was born in Nairobi. I've lived all my life in England, married to an American. My children are Arsenal supporters. I don't really belong anywhere, but I do believe that the free flow of ideas and debate and disagreement is really important. And I think I said to Peggy, if I was going to be anywhere but London, in my hometown that is in chaos at the moment, I'm glad to be at Aspen, because here I've seen so much debate and free flow of ideas. It's sort of nourished me for the time.
So, I think I am not alone in saying we really, really wish you luck in this work, and we are so lucky to have you in this role. And thank you for choosing Aspen to show the world premiere of the gorgeous film, and join me in giving a round of applause to Farah. So I'm honored to introduce you to two really incredible brave women. It seems to be kind of the theme of tonight, bravery, isn't it? So two wonderful women are taking the stage. The first is Rasha Jarhum. She is a Aspen New Voices Fellow. Woo! She's a policy advisor, researcher, and fierce advocate for women's and refugee rights for over 15 years. Rasha is from Yemen, which is declared the hardest place to be a woman in the world, which is very interesting. And she's joined by a dear friend who we love very much, who she's always pushing the boundaries of whether we'll invite her back. She just said that today because she's always throwing, the challenges to all of us here. And Mona Eltahawy is an incredible journalist and writer and activist who we love very much. And so please welcome these two amazing women in the conversation.
Thank you, Peggy. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I promise not to say fuck a lot. Rasha,
Yes.
it's such a delight, and I'm honored to be interviewing you because I have known so many incredible Yemeni women, and I know the feminism of Yemeni women, and we have mutual friends who are Yemeni feminists. So I would love it if you could share with us today your entry into feminism and women's rights in Yemen, because as Peggy mentioned, it's not a country that, especially in the United States, A, people know a lot about, and B, people have very little awareness of the feminism movement in Yemen.
Thank you, Mona. I'm really honored that you're here with me. Okay, so I have a confession to you. When I was younger, I had a really strong problem with the word feminism. And it was not because I was against women's rights, but it was like, why there isn't a parallel word like masculinist? Why do we have to identify or label ourselves as feminists? So, but with time, I came to appreciate the word. And I became an advocate for women's rights. So as Peggy said, Yemen is not La La Land for women. It has a lot of challenges, and but it wasn't the case for before. I mean, and throughout history, Yemen was two states. It was South Yemen and North Yemen, and South Yemen was actually advanced in terms of women's rights. And so, for example, we had a very strong family code, which guaranteed a lot of rights for women, including setting the minimum age, the safe age of marriage, having the woman consent, like her approval to get married, because the current law, for example, in Yemen, doesn't clearly identify the age of marriage, and this was one of the battles that we continue to do in the last few decades. Sorry, I just want to drink some water. Okay. So what happened is it was two different systems. The South Yemen was secular, and it was a socialist country, and North Yemen was more religious and conservative and capitalist country. And after unification, what happened is that domination of the fundamentalist ideology was more stronger. And so the laws in the past, in the last decade, was gradually, I call it the devolution of the women's rights. Mm-hmm. So it was a lot of laws were substituted with stemming from, I say, misinterpretation of Sharia, Islamic Sharia. Mm-hmm. And so it was, it became really challenging for women. So we still need, for example, in the law, to take permission to go to work. I have to take permission from my husband. The law actually says that. Of course, it's not really practiced, not necessarily. I mean, I'm here and my husband has his blessings, of course, but but in general, this is the case. Early marriage remains a huge challenge. And as I said, we had two tracks to campaign for eradicating early marriage. One was campaigning to raise awareness among the community, and the other one was to change the law. Mm-hmm. And we succeeded, I think, after the Arab Spring. The uprising actually gave a lot of change into the way politics happens in Yemen. And so the voices of youth and women were more heard. And so we successfully managed during the transitional period to have women issues such as setting the minimum age of marriage, approving a quota for political participation, 30% for women, were part of the transitional period national dialogue outcomes. So, and that was supposed to be translated into the new social contract in terms of the draft constitution. But unfortunately, now we have a war, and that is on pause.
Right. You know, in 2011, so soon after the various revolutions that swept across the Middle East and North Africa, I spoke at an event for International Women's Day in Beirut, in Lebanon. And one of the other speakers was also a Yemeni woman, and she spoke about the incredible role of Yemeni women in your country's revolution, just as we saw women's roles in my country's revolutions. So I'm very happy that you're here as, you know, a fellow Yemeni woman, also as a Muslim woman, because one of the things that I try to do, and I know that you try to do as well, is to challenge the stereotypes of women from our parts of the world, be they from a Muslim background or generally, you know, a Middle Eastern background. But as you mentioned, you know, despite the progress that we made because of our participation in the revolutions, each country has fared differently. So we've seen, you know, the massive bloodshed that's happened in Syria, and we will get to Syria soon. But with your country is concerned, the war that broke out, how would you say it's impacted that progress that women made because of their role in the revolution? And especially for the vulnerability of girls and women in Yemen. Describe to us a bit what you're doing through your work to help girls and women in the war conflict in your country.
All right. So if we compare violence against women before the war and after the war, the forms of violence that existed before the war were restriction of mobility, depriving from inheritance, sexual violence, physical violence. So the range was, there was FGM, early marriage, forced marriage. The range was, I mean, the violence was there. With the war, all of this has escalated, it magnified. Studies shows that it increased 70%, and it's including other forms of violence. For example, in Al-Qaeda actually stoned a woman, and that was the first time that happens in the history of Yemen, just like a couple, during this last year of war. There was a banning of travel for political leaders. There was, this is also something new. I mean, in terms of women, they don't target women. They don't see them as intimidating. But with the revolution, even political women were targeted. Other than that, what happened is, although it is a very challenging environment, but what we saw that, and it's a window of opportunity to actually challenge some stereotypes. So, for example, there was this campaign because of the lack of fuel that's happening in Yemen. Some girls decided to campaign to ride bikes, and riding bikes, believe it or not, in Yemen is a taboo for girls. So they campaigned to do that, and they started riding bikes, and it has been criticized locally, but you can see more girls riding bikes, and this is good. We are trying to change, and we are trying to have an opportunity to really challenge stereotypes. Yes. So we can be optimistic.
Right. Well, I'm a tenacious optimist. I'm forever optimistic. You know, when it comes to war, when it comes to conflict anywhere in the world, including in our part of the world, people often forget that war and conflict are essentially feminist issues, because the groups that are affected the most are girls and women. Whether we look at what's happening in Libya, through my own research for the book I wrote about and the role of Libyan women in exposing things like sexual violence that happens outside and within conflict, or Syria, and again, we'll come to Syria, or your country. I'm especially interested in your role as a peacemaker and your insistence to be included in peace talks in your country. Because despite the fact that girls and women are affected the most by war, we rarely see women on the negotiating table. We rarely see a role for women when it comes to peace talks, even though it impacts us the most. So tell us a bit about your work as a peacemaker in Yemen.
It's true. It's very challenging for women. I mean, with this war, we have around 3 million women and children who are facing malnutrition. There are 500,000 women who have no access, who are pregnant and have no access to health care. I mean, the health system has, I think, officially collapsed in Yemen. I mean, except for very small percentage of hospitals that are still operating. the impact on women is in terms of displacement, in terms of lacking all kinds of social services, social protection. Their salaries are, the jobs, the livelihoods are threatened. There is also a gender role reversal. Now women are trying to, are assuming new roles, especially with losing their husbands in this war, who are the breadwinners, or having to care for people who got injured in their families. So they're assuming a lot of roles, and when it comes to political, participation in terms of peacemaking, their participation is questioned. I'm privileged to be part of a group of women who is actually facilitated by the UN Women, called the Yemeni Women Pact for Peace and Security, and we were, 7 of us were selected, including me, to go and support the peace talks in Kuwait that are happening currently. And before we go there, I remember my plane, I'm based in Lebanon, and my plane to Kuwait was 2 hours. And I arrived in the airport, I was checking my Twitter and WhatsApp, and it was on fire because the UN envoy spoke that 7 women are on their way to come to the peace talks, and there was a huge controversy why we are there. We were actually criticized very negatively. There was a lot of solidarity with us, but the voice that was negative was very huge, and it became personal or collective attacks against the 7 of us. And they were questioning our legitimacy, our affiliation, a lot of questioning. Why is it when women has to go to be in that kind of space, you question all of this, while the delegates, who are around 26 members, 3 only are women. Nobody questions who are those 26 who are literally shaping the future of the country. Nobody questions why they are there. But when 7 women, and we went there on a visit, it wasn't even to be part of that space of negotiation. It was just a visit to try to meet the parties. So, which tells you that we're going to face a lot of challenges. I realized that happened also for the Syrian women, because the UN envoy for Syria actually formed an advisory board, and the women who are in that advisory board were attacked the same way in terms of social media and media. So I think they pick up on these things very quickly. The bad habits.
It's incredible that men create all these wars, and they affect us as girls and women the most. And even when we try to help resolve those wars, we still get attacked by the men who started the wars. But
actually, that's also women. It wasn't only men. This is why it's sad. Sometimes it's women who are enemies to women. And in my country, I see that a lot.
I often call those women the foot soldiers of patriarchy, because they think that if they support and defend patriarchy will give them crumbs. I don't want crumbs, I want the whole fucking cake. But let's go to Syria now. Let's go to Syria, because in all seriousness, the Syrian war has displaced more than half the population. And again, this affects girls and women the most. And when it comes to talking about Syrian refugees, especially in this country, where, as I like to describe him, the fascist fuck, Donald Trump, has helped to demonize refugees in a terrible way. And as we talk about the votes in, the Brexit vote in the UK, and the resurgent right wing in Europe, we have seen a horrific demonization of Syrian refugees especially, but also refugees from various African countries. Not all refugees obviously are Syrian, refugees from Eritrea, other countries that are also going through conflicts or economic crises. How do you help to change that image of the refugee, either as the terrorist or the swarms of refugees coming to take our jobs, women, whatever? Refugees have been demonized terribly. What's a message that you would like to give an audience here that can go out there and spread it and fight this fascist idea of what a refugee is?
I worked with Syrian refugees for 2 years between Lebanon and Jordan, and I remember one of the stories. I was analyzing psychosocial support scripts within the project that we were working on, and one thing that caught me was the odds that girls need to deal with when they were fleeing out of Syria. And this girl, she's 17 years old, and she was saying that she had a dilemma to choose between getting killed by a sniper, running away and getting killed by a sniper, or staying home and risk being raped by militants in front of her entire family. And she chose to run. And so this, when you have something like that and you try to think about it and you see what is happening now with all of these policies to shut the refugees back, it's just so painful. And we are in this millennium, we should be more strong in terms of human rights and refugees' rights. And instead, we are going to the dark ages everywhere, including from rich countries, such as in America, as you said, and EU, when they did this agreement with the Turkish, with Turkey, to control the borders, which looks actually like a buy and sell agreement. If an illegal immigrant comes here, we're going to resettle a refugee there, and it's not working. There are 8,000 refugees who are stuck now in Greece, I think, and resettlement is very slow. I mean, there is 1.3% of refugees who have been resettled in Europe since 2013. This is really sad. I mean, the refugees crisis is a protracted crisis, and the world is refusing to deal with it in a more sustainable and more effective way. They're still dealing with it in terms of distributing humanitarian aid, sometimes calling it, for example, the in-kind, it's dignity kits. Take this dignity kit. It's usually, especially for women, because it has like feminine toiletries and stuff. So yes, this is take your dignity back.
That's it. It's an absolute shame that the humanitarian crisis, the refugee crisis, is so badly mishandled, and it's a shame that wealthy countries, like you said, the US and the EU, have been so unhumanitarian in its treatment. But I thank you for your courage, Rasha, and I thank you for your work, as I'm sure everybody else does.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mona and Rasha. Really incredible, brave voices. And I'm sure all of us wish that we could have spent a little more time asking more specific questions and talking to both of them. And the two, Mona herself as an Egyptian activist and Rasha as a Yemeni activist, and the two different worlds they represent are sort of so interesting. So I hope we'll have another conversation with the two of them. It is true that Mona, it's not possible for her to take the stage without using the F word. So we apologize for that. How many times have you done it today, Mona? I think it's been a couple. You've lost count. There we go. We've lost count. But we haven't been fired yet or given the hook, so we're just going to keep on going along. I'm really delighted to welcome three Shiros to the stage. The first is Musimbi Kanyoro, and she's right here beside me. Musimbi is one of my dearest friends. She's the head of the Global Fund for Women and assumed a really important role in that regard. I met Musimbi many years ago when she was the head of the worldwide YWCA, which is actually a huge girls organization all over the world. And then she went on to run a very major program at the Packard Foundation working on population and human rights. Musimbi herself is a really amazing, funny, wonderful woman. Her life story is quite fascinating. And we've had really the delight and honor of working together on a number of things, Musimbi. So I love that you're here. So thank you for being with these two women. So Musimbi's going to be in conversation with two incredible young women who are affiliated. They were teen advocates with the Girl Up program, and they have grown up with this issue of the Girls Campaign. And we have Riya Singh, who's co-chair of Girl Up, and she's a researcher at UC Berkeley's Center for Girls Education in northern Nigeria, where she does research on safe space program for adolescent girls. Sofia Caballero Stafford is a junior at Duke University. She's double majoring in global health and cultural anthropology. I studied cultural anthropology, that's a good thing. It's not dead yet. With a focus on disparities in adolescent girls' health and development. She co-founded the Girls Hub Leadership Development Program at Duke and is currently interning for USAID's Saving Lives at Birth initiative. I think some of your colleagues from the office are here. So join me in welcoming these three incredible folks to the stage for a cross-cultural conversation.
Thank you, Peggy. I'm honored to be here with the youngest, the closest to the girls, on an evening where we are celebrating unleashing the girls' power. So you might know the creation story that comes from Abrahamic faith, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And it actually says that Adam was created first and then Eve. And the real truth is that Adam was the prototype, the startup, and then came the real thing. So you have the real thing. So Sophie and Riya, I'm really happy that you're here to really show us what it means, what the girls themselves, you're the closest. The UN defines girls and young women as being the age of 10 to 24. And both of you fall within this bracket. So my first question to you is, what is the question you're trying to answer when you are involved in this very strong presence and activism for unleashing the power of girls?
Thank you.
Let me begin with you, Sophie.
Okay, thank you, Musimbi. It's an honor to be here. I think I'll start with the fact that I went to an all-girls school, a secular all-girls school for 12 years. I grew up with a sister, and I grew up with my abuela, my grandmother, who always told me that what you have in your head, meaning your education, no one can ever take away from you. And in my school, all of the leadership positions were filled by girls. The captain of the soccer team, the president of student council, science Olympiad. And so I really took that for granted, that women and girls could be in leadership positions and were really able to have a platform to use their voice. And it wasn't until later in middle school and high school when I started to really learn about the opportunity gap, both in my own community, but also in developing countries. And I had an opportunity to travel with Girl Up, to visit Girl Up programs in Guatemala, and I got to spend time with some of the girls in the highlands and learning that actually they're really just like me in many ways. We have similar passions and hobbies, and we're the same ages and hopes for the future, but in many ways they're not going to get to do the things that I get to do because they have these invisible barriers that are preventing them from doing it. But I think it's important also to note that they have a voice. They aren't voiceless, and I think that's something that we as a global community sometimes label them as people girls in developing countries who don't have this access and don't have these opportunities are voiceless, but that was not the case. And really, with the tools they need to empower themselves through programs like this and through creating a global network of girl advocates, we can really work together to sort of chip away at these barriers. And so my question really is, how can we start to close this gap? How can we help to build this global network of advocates in which we are helping to give to all girls, no matter what, the tools they need to empower themselves and really be the leaders of today, not tomorrow.
So you will be able to provide some answers for us.
Check back with me in a few
Can you give
years.
me a couple of things that you think we should be doing as solutions?
I mean, I think investing in girls, and it's a common theme, but investing in girls and girl programs is incredibly important because I think something that I've found through working over the years with Girl Up is no one can empower you. No one can empower. No one can. We talk a lot about empowering others, but I think it really comes from within. And so investing in programs that provide safe spaces for girls, that increase access to education and to quality education, that provide health services to them. I think that's a really good place to start. And I think also community is really big, and it's something that's probably underestimated. Creating community and a global network, both within the U.S. but across the U.S. or across the world, and really ensuring that we have the support and the advocates to sort of back us up. So I think those two things are key to this work.
Riya, what about yourself? I'm really proud to see you here because I think your being in Gallup has something to do with our relationship.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that first. So when I was a sophomore in high school, I just graduated college, so it was a little while ago. I was a sophomore in high school, we were doing a social justice project, and I decided to focus on global women in leadership, because why not, right? So I contacted, I'm from the Bay Area, I contacted women leaders in the Bay Area, Sheryl Sandberg, all these big names, Musimbi Kanyoro, huge names, right? So I didn't get any responses back, because who am I? I'm a sophomore in high school. I thought I was nobody, but one person responded, and that was Musimbi, and she told me, come on over to my house and interview me for your documentary. And I came over to her house and I interviewed her for my documentary, and she told me that she wants to invest her time in girls, and she wants to invest in girls in a way that is kind of lacking. So she nominated me to be a teen advisor at Girl Up, and that's how I kind of got started and all of that. But to your question about kind of what is my question, what am I kind of trying to achieve with my work? I have to kind of think back to where my frustration and anger for gender disparity comes from. I mean, it's everywhere. I'm a girl in America. I mean, it's everywhere. But one of the first instances of gender disparity that I remember is being in 2nd or 3rd grade, and if you know me well, I'm kind of a goofball. I like to make jokes, inappropriate jokes with my friends, fun stuff like that. And I had that kind of naughty need for, that kind of attention in 2nd and 3rd grade. So I would make jokes and say things that, boys would typically say, and try to get laughs like boys would try to do. And it was something that was difficult because, I don't know, it was always something that, the boys are the funny people, the girls kind of laugh, and that's kind of how I felt in the environment that I was in. So my question is, how can we, moving forward, encourage girls and ensure that these kind of unconscious, discrete discouragement is obliterated for girls? How do we encourage girls to be themselves, not be ashamed to be goofballs, to be geniuses at young ages, because that's where it starts. So that's my question.
Great. Are you a feminist?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a feminist.
Say more.
Definitely. Yeah.
Say more. What does that mean to you?
Well, feminism is a big part of my life. I'm a girl, but the way, right? The way that I became a feminist is also really near and dear to my heart. I grew up, I have immigrant parents from India. My mom went through, she's from India. It's tough there. It was tough to be a girl in India. It still is tough to be a girl in India. But one of the biggest things, I grew up with feminist parents. So my dad also was a huge feminist, and I remember 2nd or 3rd grade, throughout my whole life, my dad telling us that he's a feminist. That was a big word in our family. That's something my dad told me. He told me that he was a feminist and that he was proud to have 3 daughters. So yeah, that's kind of, feminist means a lot to me because I'm a feminist because my dad is a feminist.
BC, if you're here, men can be feminists?
Yeah. I'm proud to be a feminist because my dad is a feminist. I think I'd be a feminist if my dad wasn't, but it certainly helps to know that there are men out there who are proud of equality and are proud to say that they're proud of equality. And that word, there's so much stigma behind that word, and there's a lot of controversy behind that word. It's a controversial word, but feminism means equality for all. And if we stick by that word and understand that men, women of different colors, all kinds of different people have different roles within feminism. You can call yourself a feminist, you can be a man or a woman, and that means different things for a man and a woman. You have different roles within feminism, but it is okay, at least in my perspective, I know a few people disagree, the way I was raised, it's okay to be a man and to be a feminist.
So, Sophia, are you a feminist?
I can confidently say that I'm a feminist. And, I think the reason I can confidently say that is because I believe at the root of feminism is really the idea, like Riya touched upon, that feminism is about believing that everyone has a choice and that everyone has opportunity. And I think, we often think of feminism as a women's issue, but I really think it's a global issue. And I think, I always think about like the different identities that make up who I am. And, as a person who identifies as a woman, as a Cuban, as American, as Jewish, as white, as all of these different identities, not to mention, socioeconomic status and ableness and all of those things that play into someone's identity. And I think, and now thinking more about feminism in a more nuanced perspective, we can't think about feminism by itself. We really need to start thinking about feminism with all of these different identities and how all of them really build up on each other. And something that I've come to think about a lot the last few years is, is important to recognize that all oppression is interconnected. And so if we just look at one issue or one identity, we're not really tackling all of it. And so for me, feminism is a lot more than just, equal rights for women. It is that, but there's also all of these different layers that I think we need to take into consideration. And in order to break that cycle of oppression that we often see, we need to start chipping away at all of these different barriers.
So one of the things that we're supposed to tease out here is intergenerational relationship of feminism. And even between the two of them, my age is still larger than their combined age.
I don't believe it.
Yes. So I'm wondering, what is the difference between how you experience feminism and how women of my generation experience feminism? For example, in the current political scene, there was a very big outburst to what Madam Albright said from young women, young feminists. And people of my generation really stood with what she said. So I want us to look to address this. What is it that makes us, younger women and women of my generation and maybe older, feel that there's some gap between how we think about feminism?
Well, I think it's definitely a matter of, from what I understand about your generation of feminism, I wasn't there, so I'm going to speculate a little bit.
I'll tell you about it.
And then you can clarify, sure. A lot of it had to do with proving yourself and proving that you could do what men could do. A lot of it involved going to work and maybe not having a family or leaving your family behind and making kind of proving the world, proving to the world that you can do what men can do. Is that right?
Yes,
sure.
Yes,
let's go with it.
Yes.
You can, yeah.
Let's say that was one of the things.
Yeah,
yes.
and I think today the millennial wave of feminism, I'm just going to call it that because that's what it kind of seems like. I think that our wave of feminism has a lot more to do with choice and choosing to do, when you think of choice, I think the concept of abortion comes up a lot, but choice is present in so many different areas. Choosing to, when I was little, I liked to play football with the boys. So choosing to play football and saying, yeah, I'm a feminist, but also choosing to say, no, I'm not into that, I'm not gonna play football, but I'm still a feminist, And I'm still a feminist, not but, I'm still a feminist. So that's kind of what I understand is the difference, but I think it would be helpful for you to clarify what you...
But aren't you a little bit taking it too easy in what women before us have worked so hard and grown so that you can do these things that you're saying? Because if my grandmother, for example, never used the word feminism, but she was the first woman to eat eggs when women were not allowed to eat eggs, and she paid for it. She paid for it really strongly, and I know that women before us paid for quite a lot. So when you experience this, that now you have the choice, but who really worked for that choice? Sophie, do you want to work for it? And how can we affirm that?
Yeah, I always think back to the quote, about really we're walking, sitting on the shoulder of others. And I think, we all of the waves of feminism, first wave, second wave, now third wave, all of them have really come and built up to what we have now. And I don't think, there's always pushback against, first and second waves. But, I think what's achieved in the first and second wave is incredibly important. But, I think back to the point I was saying before about, how I think now, we have to think about feminism in a more intersectional lens. And I think that's some of the pushback in terms of the second wave of feminism and who really had that choice to go out into the work field. And so I think, I don't think we can discredit or underestimate the work that has come to where we are, but I also think that we have so much to go. And I think that, continuing to build, sort of this movement and momentum around what it means to be a feminism and the importance of, that feminism isn't this black and white, that there are different ways, like you were saying before, Riya, there are different ways of embracing feminism, and I think we need to, move in that direction in order to make more progress.
So I work in the area of philanthropy now, and we are the largest fund for women in the world. And I realize that women and girls don't have as much resources as they need to do the work that they have to do. What do you think? What do you think we could do to change the nature of actually investing resources, money, I want us to talk about money.
Let's talk about money.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. What would you tell the audience? Where's the money for women and girls?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times, from what I understand about the development sector and world, the money doesn't always go to the girls if you think you're investing in them. So really understanding where that money goes and putting the money there. I think someone said earlier that investing in girls is not, it's kind of the norm now. This is what we do, but really we need to do more of it. We need to put more money into girls programs, areas that we don't think about, LGBT girls, LGBTQ, and all different kinds of areas that we don't think about normally.
Yeah, and I would say to add on to that, I mean, I think a lot of the money now in development and goes towards, there's a lot more focus, especially after the MDGs and now with the SDGs, with maternal and child health, but I still feel, especially, and that's really why I've decided to focus on disparities in adolescent girls' health in my studies. And people often look at me and they're like, that's so small, or it doesn't seem, people always question my choice to do that at school and wonder what I'm going to do with that. And I say I'm going to fill the gap. There's this gap that I see, and I think it's because a lot of, like you said, Riya, a lot of the investments, are going towards, maternal and child health causes, which are obviously incredibly important. But I think, the needs, especially the health needs of adolescent girls, are different than newborns and are different than mothers. Of course, adolescents can be mothers too. But and so I think that gap is incredibly important.
It's more than we must say. It's more than getting napkins for girls. It's more than building schools for girls. It's a whole lot more. So for our last question and our last minute, let's go back into the future and build a little bit of the future shape of feminism. What do you see?
I don't see the need for feminism. I see equality. I hope it's the case. I think feminism is a beautiful thing right now because we have so much inequality. But hopefully in the future, we can all just know that we're all feminists and not have to say it all the time. That would be nice.
Sophia?
It's hard to follow. I would say, a bigger platform, a bigger space, creating more space for girls and women. And I think, I agree. I mean, ideally, there is no need for that, and that, we all will do that. But I think in the meantime, building a platform for, girls and women to use their voice and to really, be part of the, public sphere, and both here in our country. And I think sometimes when we talk about this, we forget that there are disparities in our own country, and then also, in developing countries. But I'm curious, what about you? What do you see as the future?
What I see, I never do anything that I think that doesn't have a solution for it. Otherwise, there's no need to invest one's energy in it. I believe that the work that we do in activism, in feminism, in funding, we do it because there has to be change. And so part of my hope myself is just seeing the two of you active in the way that you are. I was once a girl. I was born in the middle of 7 girls. So I saw what it meant like to be a girl and to get an opportunity. And I have a daughter, and I have a grandson. And for that matter, I am really hopeful, like you, that we're going to create together a world in which there is safety, security, and girls and women are powerful, and they are heard, and their human dignity is respected. So thank you very much.